A half-man, half-bull monster, locked in a giant maze, waiting for its next meal of human flesh. This is the bizarre myth of the Minotaur, an angry, savage freak of nature that endures as a timeless symbol of the beast inside all men. But beneath its story lurks a stunning reality. A real world of human sacrifice, bestiality, war, and the remains of an actual labyrinth. This is the myth of the Minotaur and the truth behind it. A heavy door clanks shut behind you. A dimly lit maze of corridors lie ahead. The stench of death hangs heavy in the air. You are trapped in the labyrinth of the Minotaur, and there is no way out.
The story of the Minotaur was a horror story for the ancient Greeks.
The labyrinth was a chamber of death. Those that got locked inside of it knew there was only one fate, and that's to be devoured by a horrible, ravenous, man-eating beast.
This half man, half animal would rip you piece to piece and consume your flesh.
The Minotaur is the mutant child of a human mother and a bull father.
He has the body of an enormously strong, powerful man, but then the head of a bull with horns.
On the one hand, it's part beast, and this beast is ravenous and hungry and kills and even eats the flesh of people that it has killed. On the other hand, the Minotaur is half human, and it has a kind of vulnerability from that, in which its humanity is trapped inside of its bestiality.
At its core, this myth represents the battle between reason and savagery, between order and chaos. The ancient Greeks who told the story prided themselves on being civilized.
One of the things that the Greeks really did believe in was that human reason could do a lot.
But the Minotaur was the enemy of reason, a symbol of the animal instincts trapped inside all men.
The Minotaur, the monster, was the untamable part of nature that the Greeks were trying to get a hold of. This was the one thing that they could not control.
According to the myth, this is where the Minotaur lives, on the island of Crete. At the time when the story takes place, Crete dominates the Greek world the way the Minotaur dominates the labyrinth.
In the late Bronze Age, Crete really was the most important power in that part of the Mediterranean. The places like Athens and Sparta, which in the classical period would really become the most significant powers, really weren't anything very important at all. In fact, they had to pay tribute to Crete because it was the major power in the region.
In the myth, the Minotaur was created to punish the king of Crete, Minos, after he tried to outwit a god. Every year, it was customary that King Minos sacrifice his most prized bull as an offering to the sea god, Poseidon. But one year, his herd produced a calf so beautiful, so perfect, that Minos couldn't bear to part with it. He sacrificed a lesser bull in its place. But Poseidon was watching.
Anytime you try in Greek mythology to outsmart the gods, you're going to lose. When Poseidon saw this, he said, okay, You like your bull so much? I'm going to make your woman like your bull. And so he made Minos' wife lust for the bull.
Minos' wife, Pasiphae, falls in love with the bull.
Pasiphae's desire for the bull, I think, symbolizes a kind of animalistic lust. All of us like to think of ourselves as very rational creatures, but in reality, all of us know at our core there's some piece of us that's driven by pure animalistic desire.
The queen hatches an elaborate plan to seduce the bull. She climbs into a cow costume and lingers in the pasture where it grazes, waiting for the beast to approach.
It's a very strange myth, this one, because Pasiphae essentially engages in an act of bestiality. She's in love with this bull. She wants to have sex with this bull.
It seemed to be a preoccupation of ancient Greeks and Romans as to what the proper mode of sexual behavior was. And having sex with animals was one of those taboos that got kind of richly worked out in their mythology. In the real world, we see these mythic scenes, famous scenes of ancient bestiality, are performed in the Colosseum. You would have women slaves who would be forced to copulate with bulls in order to entertain.
Often in these real-life spectacles, the ancients were acting out Queen Pasiphae's mythical encounter with the bull. In the story, it isn't long before her strategy succeeds.
The bull spies her, is overcome with amorous desire, mounts her. 9 months later, you've got yourself a Minotaur.
The birth of monsters is very often associated with sinfulness or some other kind of wrongdoing. Certainly, this is both of those things. Because Minos didn't keep his end of the bargain, because Pasiphae indulged in an unnatural desire, the child is born monstrous and deformed.
A half-human, half-bull baby boy, destined to become a horror.
He's a monster, that's how we know him. But at the same time, he seems to be a victim of his fate. And that's why I have mixed feelings about the Minotaur. I cannot really condemn him.
The Minotaur has a strange name. His father isn't Minos, but the first half of his name comes from the name Minos. The second half, Tauros, is the Greek word for a bull. So Minotaur means the bull of Minos.
To the ancients, this man-bull hybrid was a powerful and frightening concept. Bulls were a central part of Greek civilization. In fact, they were even worshipped as gods.
There were a lot of sacrifices and rituals around bull cults all across the Eastern Mediterranean.
A bull represents male virility and strength, and that's exactly what the bull was religiously. An icon representing male potency and fertility, great strength and power as well.
The memory of the power of the bull carried through into Judeo-Christian times, and we see in pictures of the Nativity the bull breathing in to the baby Jesus with its life force.
According to the myth, the tyrannical King Minos is furious when the Minotaur is born and decides to use it as a weapon against anyone who dares to challenge his power. He devises a sinister plan to build the world's most terrifying prison and makes his beastly stepson its man-eating warden. To build it, Minos turns to his resident engineering genius, Daedalus.
Daedalus is the world's most famous ancient builder. He's like Thomas Edison and Frank Lloyd Wright rolled into one. He's able to construct beautiful monuments, and he's able also to construct flying machines, wonders of ancient technology.
Daedalus makes plans for a prison with no barred cells, just a massive, winding maze. It would be so vast, so impossible to navigate, that even he could barely make it out alive. And in its heart would lie the Minotaur, waiting for its prey.
It was a series of passages and stairways. There is some sort of mystical or strange effect inside the labyrinth that so confuses those who walk through it that they don't know where they are in a short time.
Dark, disorienting, deadly. This mythical labyrinth would be terrifying. But is it more than just a myth? Today, there's an underground maze on the island of Crete with an eerie resemblance to the labyrinth of the Minotaur, the cave of Messara. It's an ancient underground quarry that, according to local lore, may have inspired the myth. Winding passageways stretch for over 2 miles in no particular order. In fact, most people who dare to enter run a cable with them to make sure they don't get lost. The same tactic will prove crucial for the Minotaur's victims later in the myth. Chisel marks found along these tunnel walls prove the caves are man-made, that they were dug with ancient tools. For centuries, visitors who came to explore this place were convinced they had found the home of the Minotaur, and many of them left their mark. Today, explorers still take on the challenge of navigating the labyrinth. Their objective is to reach this central room where it is said the Minotaur once dwelled.
They come here to beat their fears, and if they win, they accomplish the mission. They write their names on it and go out happy.
It would be very nice if it were the labyrinth. I mean, everybody wants to know where the idea of the labyrinth came from. And when you see caves like this, right away the idea must have come to the people that this might have been the lair of the Minotaur.
An ancient man-made maze on the same island where the myth is said to have taken place. It's the perfect candidate for the Minotaur's labyrinth in every way but one. Most experts think the myth is older than the cave.
It was worked very late in Greek Roman times, and there are recorded visits by many pilgrims during this period. But the actual myth of a labyrinth and a Minotaur came much, much earlier.
If Messara isn't the place that inspired the myth of the labyrinth, what is? The hunt for clues leads back to the myth. With his horrifying maze complete, Crete's king Minos shifts his focus and hunts for its first victims. It's mealtime for the Minotaur. According to an ancient myth, the island of Crete is home to a half-man, half-bull monster who hungrily patrols a dark labyrinth. The labyrinth itself is so confusing, even its builder can barely find the way out. Inside, the Minotaur awaits its first victims, hungry for human flesh. Meanwhile, 200 miles north in a small city-state called Athens, athletes have gathered from all over the Mediterranean to compete in a series of sporting challenges. It's an early precursor to the Olympic Games. Among the competitors is Prince Androgeus, the son of Crete's king Minos, and the half-brother of the Minotaur.
Minos' son, Androgeus, won every contest, running, throwing, singing. He was a star. And it so upset a number of the Athenian youth that they got into a drunken brawl and went and killed him.
The son of a king, murdered in cold blood. This means war.
Once the news reaches Minos, of course, his grief is overwhelming and his rage and thirst for revenge is enormous.
King Minos decides to punish the Athenians in the worst possible way. He will feed them to the Minotaur. The Cretan navy drops anchor at Athens and delivers an ultimatum.
Minos demanded that they send 7 male virgins and 7 female virgins to be sacrificed to the Minotaur.
Virgins were a prized commodity in the ancient world because it was believed their purity made them closer to the gods.
They would be put on a ship, and the ship would take them in very degrading circumstances to Crete. They would be led, crying and in great tears, into the labyrinth where they would be consumed by the monster.
So goes the myth. But what is the connection to reality? Here, the story symbolizes an actual historical conflict. An epic struggle between an aging superpower and an up-and-coming state. Early in Greek history, Athens and Crete were real-life enemies. But Crete's massive navy gave it a decided advantage. In both myth and reality, it was David versus Goliath.
In the Minotaur myth is pretty clearly a symbolic overlay of real history. Crete was a very powerful civilization, and they kind of lorded it over the city-states on mainland Greece.
When Minos made this outrageous demand, what it was a reflection of the Cretan dominance of that entire area.
The Athenians told the Minotaur story as political propaganda. The Minotaur represented the tyranny of Crete. The labyrinth was Crete's nearly inescapable power, and the victims symbolized the suffering of Athens. The myth's purpose was to make the Cretans seem barbaric and evil, and it worked.
For the Greeks themselves, who embellished this story over the centuries, it was a very important proof that they and their gods and their rational thinking were superior to the Cretans and their bulls and their monsters.
In the myth, Athens is forced to send human sacrifices to the Minotaur every 9 years, or face all-out war with Crete. But why 9 years?
It seems from their records they had an understanding of the movement of the moon through various constellations that go through about a 9-year cycle. And that would be then the basis of the 9-year sacrifice.
Whenever a full moon falls on the equinox, it will be time to send fresh sacrifices to the beast. As the first victims are being locked inside the labyrinth, a pivotal event is unfolding across the sea. In a small kingdom 50 miles from Athens, a baby boy is being born. His name is Theseus. He is one of the first great heroes of Greek myth, the one who is destined to challenge the Minotaur.
The birth of Theseus is of preeminent importance in terms of Athenian national identity.
Theseus belongs to an older order of heroes. They are characterized by tremendous strength, tremendous bravery, and also great brain power.
Theseus is the son of a beautiful Greek princess, and not one, but 2 powerful fathers. On the night he was conceived, his mother had sex with both Aegeus, king of Athens, and Poseidon, god of the sea.
What usually happens is that the mother will sleep with the human father and also sleep in the same time frame with the divine father, so that the child is fertilized by 2 people simultaneously. Having dual paternity allows him to both inherit the throne from Aegeus as well as have access to things like Poseidon's special favors.
This two-father scenario was a common plotline in ancient myths. It's even something real-life rulers often claimed for themselves.
One of the perhaps best known is Alexander the Great, who celebrates himself as being partially divine. Later on in the Roman period, the Roman emperors, starting with Augustus, claim that they became gods. It gives you a kind of authority if you can say, I'm actually the child of a god.
According to the myth, when Theseus is born, King Aegeus buries his sandals and a sword beneath a huge rock. He tells Theseus's mother that when the boy is strong enough to lift that rock, he should come to claim his rightful place as Prince of Athens. Nine years later, Crete again demands that 7 men and 7 women be sent as tribute to die in the Minotaur's labyrinth. The kingdom needs a hero. The third time Crete demands its tribute, Theseus is ready. He is finally strong enough to lift the rock that hides his father's sword and sandals. He vows to enter the labyrinth, battle the Minotaur, and free Athens from the tyranny of Crete. It's the classic face-off between monster and hero. And modern evidence has revealed some shocking truth behind it. The city of Athens is in mourning. Once again, it is time to send human sacrifices to the Minotaur. The innocent victims demanded by King Minos, the tyrant of Crete. Those chosen are sure to die. But there is one who vows to challenge fate. The Prince of Athens, Theseus. He is anxious to prove his bravery and to free his kingdom.
All heroes have to commit great acts in order to gain their status. So he needs to go out and do something great. And that is going to be to stop the Athenians from having to submit to Minos and submit their children to the Minotaur.
The stage is set. It's Theseus, heroic symbol of man at his best, against the Minotaur, the savage reflection of man at his worst. Before Theseus departs for Crete, his father gives him an important order. When and if he returns to Athens, he must hoist the white sail instead of the black. That way, when the ship appears on the horizon, the king will know his son is safe. According to the myth, this is where Theseus was headed. Knossos, the capital city of King Minos and the Cretans. The ancient Greeks believed this was the home of the Minotaur, a scene of horrific crimes against humanity. Today, its ruins still hold clues about the reality behind the myth. At the height of Crete's power, between 1700 and 1450 BC, this city was home to 100,000 people. At its center was a vast palace with a complex layout. In fact, some experts believe it was the original inspiration for the labyrinth.
It must have been extremely difficult for anyone to find their way all around that huge palace, which had something like 1,000 rooms in it and 5 stories in some places. There were many passageways in it. There were no halls. The passageways went from one little room to another little room, so you could not find a direct line anywhere.
My guess is that when the Greeks first saw this, they couldn't make sense of it, so that's where the notion of the labyrinth came from. They would have imagined it as a dungeony, dark series of corridors that violated the Greek sense of symmetry. Greeks like symmetry.
Modern excavations inside the palace have only strengthened its connection to the Minotaur myth. Throughout the site, signs of bull worship can be found. One fresco found in the palace even depicts a young man battling a bull. It's a scene that seems torn almost directly from the myth.
The depiction from the Knossos Palace shows a naked young man somersaulting over the top of a bull with large horns that seems to be enraged and chasing him.
An ancient palace that looks like a maze, filled with artifacts related to bulls. It's easy to see how this place might have inspired the myth. But the connections do not end there. Archaeologists have unearthed evidence suggesting the existence of a real King Minos. A throne room, with its seat still perfectly intact. It's the oldest ever found in Europe, dating back 3,500 years. Also found was an inscription in an ancient language that may even mention the king by name.
In the archives of the Temple of Crete, there were stone tablets which have inscribed on them words which look to be like the name of King Minos. It's one word, Minute, a second word, Roja, which could mean Minos the king. Roja is a title for royalty.
These clues suggest King Minos may have actually lived. But the most intriguing connection to the Minotaur myth appears on another tablet found at the site. It depicts an offering to a so-called mistress of the labyrinth. Here, in writing, is a direct reference to the maze of the Minotaur. It's an unmistakable connection between the city of Knossos and the myth. But who was this mistress of the labyrinth? Her identity is an intriguing mystery. Experts believe it was a woman of great importance at the palace, a high-ranking priestess, or even the daughter of the king. In the myth, King Minos' daughter is Ariadne, and she plays an important role in the rest of the story.
We don't know who the mistress of the labyrinth was, but it could have been Ariadne, inasmuch as she was entitled to be the priestess of the temple because she was the first daughter of King Minos.
From the moment Theseus arrives in Crete to be sacrificed, Princess Ariadne is drawn to him.
Ariadne notices Theseus' bearing, his courage, his unblinking gaze, and is immediately smitten with him.
She's just sort of overcome by the power of her love for Theseus, and she immediately decides that she's going to help him because she doesn't want him to die in the labyrinth as all the other figures do.
But Ariadne must act fast. She seeks out Daedalus, the designer of the labyrinth, and begs him to explain how to escape it. What he gives her is a clue. In Old English translations of this myth, the word clue means a ball of twine. This is what Daedalus gives to Ariadne, and it's how the modern word clue originated.
And Daedalus said, "Why don't you just use a ball of twine? Tie one end to the door and then unravel it as you go into the labyrinth. Once you're in the center, you can find your way back out by following the twine." We have continued to use balls of twine in underwater exploration. The divers will tie the end of the twine to an opening in a wreck or a cave, go inside, explore, and then follow the twine back out again. reason, which is what the Greeks honored more than anything else, is the thing that solves the problem. A very simple answer to what seems to be an impossible situation.
Ariadne secretly visits Theseus in his holding cell and offers him her clue on one condition. He must marry her if he survives.
When Theseus meets Ariadne, he's sort of in a bind, right? He's going into the middle of a labyrinth, about to be eaten alive by a Minotaur. And when Ariadne volunteers to help him, he really doesn't have much of a choice. It's either do what she asks or take his chances. And he's not going to take chances.
The next morning, 14 victims are locked inside the labyrinth. Lambs ripe for the slaughter. With his ball of twine in hand, Theseus leads the way into the maze.
Theseus ties off the ball of twine at the door and starts to walk step by step through this dark, dank tunnel.
Theseus has been offered as a human sacrifice. It's a concept that is hard to fathom today, but evidence suggests that the real ancient Cretans not only sacrificed humans, they also may have eaten them. Theseus, the prince of Athens, is leading his fellow victims deeper into the labyrinth, determined to confront the Minotaur head-on. He has a ball of twine, a clue, so that he can find his way back out. As the beastly growls of the Minotaur grow louder, Theseus is resolute, but those trapped with him are beginning to unravel.
As the victims walk through the labyrinth, one can imagine how terrified they must have been. Just think about going into that dark space, and then as you wandered, not being able to see anything.
They knew that somewhere else in this maze, there was this horrible man-eating creature that would devour them. You never know at what point you're going to encounter the monster.
Deep inside the maze, the Minotaur stirs. He hears the screams of frightened victims headed his way. And he's ready for his next feast of flesh. This is the enemy Theseus must defeat in order to free Athens from the tyranny of Crete. So goes the myth. But what is the link to reality? The tension between Athens and Crete during the Bronze Age is well documented. But were the Cretans really as savage as the myth suggests? At Knossos Palace, excavations have turned up possible evidence that suggests some truth behind the story. Inscriptions found at the site have been interpreted by some as offerings made to the gods. Human offerings.
There are records of a female servant being offered, and also 10 males being offered.
Real people killed in ritual sacrifice, just like the victims of the Minotaur in the myth.
The suggestion is that there actually was human sacrifice being practiced on Crete.
But the evidence extends beyond inscriptions. There are also bones that bear the markers of cold-blooded murder. In 1979, over 300 of them were unearthed in Knossos. Unbelievably, All of them belonged to children. About 25% of them bore cut marks made by a fine blade, the type that would have been used to remove flesh from bone.
The bones had the marks of knives. They had cut marks on the sides of the bones. So it's hard to get around the fact that there was butchery going on here, perhaps even cannibalism. I don't know how else one could interpret this kind of evidence.
Sheep bones were also uncovered in the same place as the human bones. All were slashed in a similar manner.
These scrape marks look a lot like the kind of marks that result from butchery of animals that are being prepared to eat.
This suggests that the ancient Cretans were not only sacrificing humans, but eating them. Is the Minotaur's thirst for human flesh an encoded message about cannibalism?
It's the most repulsive and abhorrent crime we can ever even imagine. It's a perfect way to demonize someone. So we can imagine that the ancient Greeks would have told this story about their great enemy, Crete, that not only were they horrible people, they were monsters, and even still they were cannibals.
The myth continues. The labyrinth's corridors are cloaked in darkness. It is impossible for Theseus to find his way by sight. But the grunts and growls of the Minotaur are getting louder. They are his compass. His ball of twine, his clue, is small now, a quarter the size it was when Theseus entered the maze. The beast is near.
He smells the stench of blood on the walls. He sees the bones of the poor beast's prior victims. He rounds a corner and sees a sleeping Hulk.
Even the breath of the Minotaur fills him with fear. But this is the difference between heroes and us ordinary folks. The hero feels the fear, masters it, and pursues the great deed.
Theseus ambushes, catching the beast half asleep.
Theseus approaches. The Minotaur is startled, jumps up, and attacks.
Axe meets sword as man battles beast. The future of Athens and Crete hangs in the balance. In the pre-dawn hours, the sounds of struggle pierce the night. Inside the labyrinth, Theseus has the Minotaur cornered.
He then pounces on it, attacks. Before the beast even knows what hit him, Theseus has the upper hand. The Minotaur struggles and gasps.
The hero goes in for the kill. The Minotaur, this tortured, trapped, terrible soul, is dead. Theseus, son of Poseidon and prince of Athens, has destroyed the curse of King Minos.
You can imagine that his heart is pounding, his adrenaline is pumping. He's covered with the muck and blood of this dead beast and all the other human beings that this beast has ingested over the years.
That the forces of reason, as embodied by Theseus, overcame the forces of irrationality, as embodied by the Minotaur.
But there's no time to celebrate his victory. Daybreak is approaching. Theseus needs to move fast if he's going to escape the wrath of King Minos.
Once he's killed the Minotaur, it's not quite over because Minos is not going to be happy about this, of course. So he has to retrace his steps, get out of the labyrinth, and then get back onto the ship.
he follows his thread back out and leads the still living youths of Athens out of the labyrinth.
I can imagine the joy that must have come over the kids when they saw that their fate was not what they expected, that the fate was actually changed by the deed of the hero.
Ariadne, the princess of Crete, has spent a restless night listening for any sign of Theseus's survival. He's promised to marry her if he escapes the Minotaur alive, and she intends to hold him to it. Just before dawn, she joins him, and their ship sets sail for Athens. It's a defining moment in Greek mythology.
When Theseus slays the Minotaur, the action is really a symbolic act in which we have a hero of Athens who's finally overthrowing the yoke of Crete.
It's a symbol of Greece beating Crete. It's a symbol of human bravery and ingenuity. So all the stories, they inspired the young citizens to be faithful to their country, to be able to sacrifice themselves for their city's glories, and ultimately to become true citizens of a democratic city.
Theseus leaves Crete a hero, but his voyage home will end in tragedy. When he left to fight the Minotaur, Theseus promised his earthly father, King Aegeus, that he would hoist a white sail if he returned home alive to signal his victory. Every morning for months, Aegeus would visit the same seaside cliff, looking for any sign of the ship. But when it finally appears on the horizon, its sail is black. The king is inconsolable, thinking his son has been devoured by the Minotaur. In his grief, Aegeus leaps to his death in the sea below. To this day, that sea is called the Aegean, after Theseus's father.
When Theseus fails to raise the white sail, the original ancient tale, it doesn't tell us any motivations as to why he forgets. But in the end, the original myth seems to suggest a kind of carefreeness of youth.
That's the easiest explanation. He was so excited by his victory, he was on his way home, and he simply just forgot to do it.
Aegeus's sudden death is a shocking development. Theseus comes ashore not only as the liberator of Athens, but as its new king. The king who, according to the myth, would transform the city from a backwater outpost into a regional superpower.
In this myth, Athens' rise to power is definitely credited to Theseus. In fact, the myth seems to have been written in part to prove this.
In adopting Theseus as their founding hero, the Athenians were really making a statement. They were saying that this long-time domination of Crete was now over, and that there was a new top dog in town, and it was Athens.
Athens would go on to become the Greek world's dominant city-state, while Crete would collapse and be conquered. But long after both kingdoms have faded into history, the myth of Theseus and the Minotaur endures. And like every good myth, it reveals insights into human nature that are as relevant today as they were 3,000 years ago.
There's a lot of things that one can read into the Minotaur story. You can imagine the labyrinth as being the human mind, a dark place that we constantly explore in our conscious state. The animal nature, the nature that compels us to kill.
These myths reveal to us in a uniquely powerful way parts of ourselves that we otherwise keep hidden. Hidden urges and desires, hidden means by which we deal with the world. The most fundamental struggles of human experience.